The town of Red Rock Flats didn't look like a place worth dying for. It sat low in a dust bowl at the bottom of 3 bleached hills, the kind of hills that looked like God had pressed his thumbs into the earth and left the impressions there to bake for 1,000 years. The main street ran straight and wide enough for 2 wagons to pass without touching, though these days most people avoided Red Rock Flats entirely. The merchants who hadn't fled boarded their windows at dusk. The women who remained didn't walk alone after noon. The church had been converted into a saloon, which the Harlan boys considered the funniest thing they'd ever done, and they'd done some terrible things. So when the rider appeared at the north end of the street on a Tuesday morning in late October, the few people who bothered to look didn't think much of him. He came in slow. Not the slow of a man being cautious, and not the slow of a man being dramatic. Just the slow of a man who had been riding a long time and saw no reason to hurry now that the destination was finally underneath him. His horse was a gray mare, old enough to have earned her pace, dusty enough to suggest they'd come from somewhere far. The man himself was older, nobody could say exactly how old from a distance, but the way he sat in the saddle had a quality to it, like a fence post that had been standing so long it became part of the landscape. He wore a long brown coat. Plain. No silver conchos, no tooled leather, nothing that caught the light. A dark hat, sweat-stained at the band, pushed back just enough to let you see his face if you were looking, which most people weren't. He had a gray beard, trimmed but not carefully, and eyes that were set back in his face the way some men's eyes get after they've spent a long time squinting against sun and wind and things they'd rather not have seen. He had a rifle in a scabbard, a pistol on his right hip, and a tin star pinned to the inside of his coat, not the outside, which was the detail that Clyde Harlan noticed first when the old man climbed down from his horse in front of what used to be the sheriff's office. Clyde was sitting on the rail outside the converted church, one boot propped up and a bottle of whiskey between his knees, watching the street the way he always watched the street, like a man who owned it, because in every way that mattered in Red Rock Flats, he did. Clyde was 32, broad-shouldered, and had the confident look of a man who had hurt a lot of people and gotten away with it every time. His brother Cole was beside him, a little leaner and a little meaner, and 2 of their riders were posted on the other rail. The old man tied his horse at the post, walked to the door of the old sheriff's office, found it locked, tried it once, didn't try it again, and instead sat down in a single wooden chair that stood on the narrow porch. He pulled a small folded paper from his coat pocket, unfolded it, and appeared to read it. Clyde watched this for a moment with his head tilted. "You lost, old-timer?" he called out. The man didn't look up from his paper. Clyde exchanged a grin with Cole. "I'm talking to you, grandfather." The man turned the page over. Reading the back of it now, or appearing to. Cole snorted. "Maybe he's deaf." "Maybe he's dead," one of the riders said, and they all laughed. The man folded the paper and put it back in his coat. He looked down the street in one direction, then the other, taking a quiet inventory of the place. Then he reached into the coat and pinned the tin star to the outside of it, where it was visible, and he settled back in his chair. Clyde Harlan stared at the badge. Then he started laughing, a real laugh, not a performed one, the kind that actually bent him forward over his knees. "Cole," he said. "Cole, you seeing this?" "I'm seeing it. They sent us a sheriff." "They did. They sent us that for a sheriff." Cole dragged his gaze from the old man to his brother and back again, and he smiled the smile of a man who is trying to decide if something is funny or an insult. He settled on funny. "What are you, old man? Some kind of joke they're playing on us?" The new sheriff looked at Cole Harlan for the first time. His expression didn't change in any way that could be described, exactly. It was more like the absence of change. Like a rock that had been asked to question. "I'll need the key to this office," the man said. His voice was even and low, not graveled the way old men's voices sometimes go, just settled, like river water over smooth stone. That made them laugh harder. His name, according to the letter of appointment that the county had sent ahead of him, was Elias Cord. The letter arrived 3 days before he did, tossed on the bar inside the Harlan boys' saloon by the mail rider, who had the sense not to linger. Deputy Hatch, the only law that technically existed in Red Rock Flats, though law was a flexible word for what Hatch represented, had read the letter, looked at the Harlans, and said nothing useful. Hatch was 40, soft in the middle, and had survived the Harlan occupation of Red Rock by becoming more useful to them than threatening. He delivered messages. He kept records that could be adjusted if needed. He wore his badge because removing it would have required a kind of courage he balanced carefully against the rewards of cowardice and found the cowardice more comfortable. He came to find the new arrival that first afternoon, after the Harlan boys had lost interest and gone back inside to drink. He found Elias Cord still sitting in the chair on the porch, now drinking coffee from a battered tin cup he'd apparently produced from his saddlebag. Hatch stopped at the foot of the porch steps and cleared his throat. "You're Cord," he said. "I am. Deputy Hatch." He didn't offer his hand. "I want to be straight with you. Man to man." "All right. This situation here in Red Rock, it's complicated. There's a balance. Things work a certain way, and that way, while it maybe isn't pretty, it keeps people from getting killed." Cord sipped his coffee. "What I'm saying," Hatch continued, choosing his words the way a man chooses footing on a narrow ledge, "is that coming in here and starting trouble isn't going to help anybody. Including you." Cord looked at him then. That same look, the still water, the rock. "How many people has the balance killed so far?" Hatch blinked. "Excuse me?" "The balance you're describing. The arrangement. How many people has it killed to keep itself balanced?" Hatch opened his mouth, closed it. He looked off down the street. "3, he said, finally, because he was just honest enough for the number to come out when pushed. "In how long?" "Year and a half." Cord nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something he'd already figured. He drank the last of his coffee and set the cup on the rail. "I'll need that office key," he said. Hatch gave it to him. He couldn't have explained later exactly why. Part 2, The Measure of a Man. Word travels fast in small towns, and in dying towns it travels faster because there's less noise to drown it out. By evening, everyone in Red Rock Flats knew that a new sheriff had come in, an old man on a tired horse, quiet as a post, who had sat in front of the empty sheriff's office all day and hadn't done a single thing except drink coffee and occasionally write something in a small notebook. The general opinion, formed quickly and held with the lazy confidence of people who've seen men come and go, was that he wouldn't last 2 weeks. Most gave him less than 1. May Aldridge, who ran the only functioning boarding house left on the east side of the street, watched him from her window when he finally rose and walked his horse around back to the livery. She was 53, a widow twice over, and she had the rare quality in a frightened town of paying attention to things other people dismissed. She watched the way he walked. Not the shuffling economy of a genuinely old man. Something else. Something controlled, deliberate, like a man who had decided long ago exactly how he wanted to move through the world and never revisited the decision. She rented him a room without comment. At dinner, she put a plate in front of him, beans, salt pork, bread, and sat across from him with her own plate because she was tired of eating alone and had decided that if this man was going to get himself killed, she at least wanted a conversation first. "How long you been a lawman?" she asked. He chewed, swallowed, broke bread. "On and off." "What do you do in the off?" "Other things." She looked at his hands on the table. The right one had a scar that ran from the base of his thumb to just past the wrist, a clean line, old and pale. His knuckles had been broken more than once and healed unevenly. They were working hands, but not farm working. "Something else. You know what those boys will do to you," she said. It wasn't a question. "I have an idea. They killed the last man with a badge in this county. Shot him in the back outside the mill. Left him there." Cord looked at her. "Tom Ellery," he said. She stopped chewing. "You knew him?" "I knew of him. He returned to his meal. Good man. Didn't deserve that." May set her fork down. Something in the way he said it, flat and certain, like a line in a ledger, unsettled her in a way she couldn't name. "Who are you?" Exactly, Mr. Cord. He wiped his mouth with the napkin. Set it beside his plate. The new sheriff, he said, and he meant it to be final, so she let it be. The saloon that night was loud in the way of places that have claimed their noise as a kind of authority. The Harlan boys held court at the long bar, Clyde on a stool, Cole leaning with one elbow, their 5 riders spread across the nearest tables. A piano player worked a tired instrument in the corner. 2 women in faded dresses moved between tables collecting empty glasses and empty compliments. Cord walked in at 9 o'clock. The piano didn't stop. It wasn't that kind of town yet, not the kind where a man's entrance commands the room, but Clyde Harlan saw him and straightened on his stool, and a small, mean smile arranged itself on his face. "Well," Clyde said, loud enough to carry. "The sheriff's come to make his rounds." Cord walked to the bar. Nodded to the bartender, a thin man named Perkins who had the pallor and posture of someone who had been frightened for a very long time. "Coffee," Cord said. "We got whiskey," Clyde said. "Real men drink whiskey. Coffee's fine." Perkins poured it. His hands were steady, the steadiness of long practice, not comfort. Cole Harlan drifted down the bar to stand closer. He was studying Cord with the narrowed eyes of a man who was used to measuring people and finding them wanting. "That star on your chest," he said. "That a real one, or you take it off a dead man?" "County issued it." "County." Cole said the word like it was a foreign language. "County doesn't mean much out here, old man." Cord drank his coffee. His eyes moved, not quickly, not ostentatiously, just steadily, across the room. Counting tables. Marking positions. Reading the room the way some men read a book, not for pleasure but because the information matters. "You're taking inventory," Cole said. He'd noticed. He was sharper than his brother in certain ways. "Looking at where everybody is." "Just drinking coffee," Cord said. "6 of us," Cole said. "And you. How do you like those numbers?" Cord set the cup down. He turned to look at Cole directly, and there was a pause that lasted less than 3 seconds, but in that pause something happened that Cole Harlan couldn't quite define later, when he was replaying it. The old man's eyes were light, gray or pale blue, hard to say in the saloon light, and when they settled on Cole, Cole felt, for just a moment, the completely unreasonable sensation that he was the one being evaluated and found wanting, not the other way around. Then the moment passed and Cord picked up his coffee again. "When's the last time anyone took inventory of your operations?" Cord asked pleasantly. "What?" "Accounts." "What's been taken, from who, when?" "Records." He finished the coffee. Laid a coin on the bar. Nodded to Perkins. "Good night, Mr. Perkins." He walked out. Cole stared after him. "What was that about?" he asked. Nobody answered, because nobody knew. Part 3, The Notebook. He spent his second day in the office. He'd cleaned it out the evening before. Whoever had been in there before had left papers, an overturned chair, a broken lantern, and what appeared to be dried blood on the floor beside the desk, which Cord cleaned without ceremony. He put the chair upright. He found a functional lantern in the livery and borrowed it. He brought his notebook and a sharpened pencil, and he sat at the desk and he worked. The notebook, as May Aldrich discovered when she brought him lunch and found him deep in it, was dense with small, precise handwriting. Lists, mostly. Names. Dates. Amounts. The kind of notebook a meticulous man keeps when he is building something or dismantling something. "What is all that?" she asked, setting the plate beside him. "Records," he said, not looking up. "Where are you getting records from?" "From people." He turned a page. "Talked to Bill Garner this morning." "The feed store." "Talked to Mrs. Pemberton at the dry goods." "Talked to the man who runs the assay office, Hollis, I think." May sat in the spare chair. "You talked to Hollis?" "He hasn't said a word to anyone official in a year and a half." "He talked to me." Cord glanced up at her briefly. "He kept records too." Smart man, lawless. Kept them hidden. She thought about this. The Harlans have been taking from the merchants. A tax, they call it. It isn't a tax. I know what it is. He wrote something. It's extortion, and it's documented now. Documentation doesn't stop bullets. No, he agreed. But it does other things. He closed the notebook. Picked up his lunch. Things that last longer. She watched him eat for a moment, turning something over in her mind. Can I ask you something? You can ask. That scar on your hand. The one on your right. He looked at it. Old, he said. I know it's old. I'm asking how you got it. He was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of a man evading, more the quiet of a man deciding how much context a true answer requires. Knife fight, he said. Long time ago. You win? He picked up his coffee. I'm here, he said simply, and left it at that. On the third day, Cord went to see the two men who were sitting in the small jailhouse behind the old sheriff's office. He hadn't known about them at first. Hatch had mentioned them only obliquely, and Cord had found the cell block on his own. Two men, both young, both rough-looking, both put there by the Harlans for reasons that had nothing to do with law and everything to do with a dead dispute that had not gone Clyde's way. Their names were Price and Dunmore. They'd worked a small cattle operation 6 miles east of town until the Harlans had taken an interest in it. Cord let them out on the morning of the third day. You can't do that, Hatch said, appearing in the doorway of the cell block, his hat in his hands, his face doing the complicated thing it did when he was frightened and trying to look merely concerned. I'm the sheriff, Cord said. They're being held without charges. The Harlans put them there. The Harlans don't have arresting authority. Cord handed Price his hat, which had been sitting on a shelf. Do they, deputy? Hatch said nothing. Price looked at Cord with suspicious eyes, the eyes of a man who'd been burned before by people who appeared helpful. They'll come for us again, he said. Probably, Cord agreed. You have somewhere you can stay that isn't in their direct path for a few days? May Aldridge might take us in. Talk to her. Tell her I sent you. Cord walked back to the main office. Then he stopped and turned back. How many head did they take from your operation? Price and Dunmore exchanged a look. 63, Dunmore said. Give or take. 63. Cord wrote it in his notebook. On the fourth day, something happened that rippled through Red Rock Flats in a way that the residents would talk about for a long time afterward, though none of them fully understood it at the time. A rider came in from the south. Not a local man, a man in city clothes, trail dusty but originally fine, carrying a leather satchel. He asked for the sheriff's office, found it, knocked, and was admitted. He was inside for the better part of 3 hours. He left without speaking to anyone else, rode back south. No one knew his name. No one found out, for 2 more days, what had been discussed. Clyde Harlan watched the rider come and go from the saloon window, and a thin thread of something that wasn't quite worry moved through him, more like a premonition, gone before he could hold it. Find out who that was, he told Cole. Cole tried. Couldn't. That bothered Clyde more than he was willing to say. Part 4, The Recognition. The 5th day brought a stranger to the Harlan saloon, and this was the beginning of everything. He was a tall man, past 50, with a long jaw and a distinctive way of carrying his arms, slightly out from his body, like a man permanently ready, permanently aware of the space around him. He wore the clothes of a working man but with a certain quality to the leather and the stitching that didn't quite match the worn look he was going for. He had a Remington on his left hip, butt forward, which was the kind of holster choice that meant something specific to people who paid attention to such things. He came in, ordered whiskey, drank it, ordered another. He was at the end of the bar, not bothering anyone, not looking for conversation, which was exactly the kind of quiet that eventually makes people look at you in a small room. Cole Harlan looked. The tall man's eyes drifted to the badge on Cole's vest. Cole had taken to wearing one recently as a joke, a rusted thing with the star bent, and then away. You passing through? Cole asked. Thinking about it. The tall man finished his second whiskey. Set the glass down with care. Heard there's work in this territory. What kind of work? Kind I'm suited to. Cole leaned on the bar. He liked these conversations. He liked the negotiation, the circling. And what kind is that? The tall man finally looked at him directly. He had the same quality of stillness that Cord had, though less refined, like he'd practiced it rather than grown into it. I've done ranch work. Some security work. Some other work. Other work. Cole nodded. That's the part I'm interested in. They talked for 20 minutes, Cole and the tall man, and by the end of it the tall man had accepted a job with the Harlan outfit, riding protection for a cattle movement they had planned for the following week, the cattle being, though the tall man didn't know this and didn't ask, a portion of Price and Dunmore's stolen herd. He gave his name as Beaumont. Said he'd just come in from the Wyoming territory. Wyoming, Clyde said, who had drifted over by then. Long ride. Long enough, Beaumont said. He asked about a place to sleep. Perkins directed him to May Aldridge's boarding house. Beaumont saw Cord when he came down for breakfast the next morning. He stopped in the doorway of the dining room. He stood there for a moment that was just a moment too long, and May, who was pouring coffee, noticed, and looked between the two men. Cord was seated at the table reading yesterday's newspaper, which had arrived with the mail rider and was thus 4 days old, which in Red Rock Flats qualified as current events. He hadn't looked up. Beaumont sat down slowly. He accepted his coffee. He unfolded his napkin. Then he said, very quietly, looking at his plate, "Well, I'll be damned." Cord turned a page of the newspaper. "I heard a rumor," Beaumont said, same quiet voice, not looking at him. "A couple months back. In Laramie. Man in a saloon said he'd heard that Elias Cord had taken a county appointment somewhere in New Mexico territory." He paused. "I told him he was drunk." Cord set the paper down. He looked at Beaumont for a moment with that steady, still look. "You're Beaumont," he said. "You know me?" "I know your work." Something very slight moved in Cord's expression, not quite respect, not quite warning, a mixture that sat between them. "You were with the Pinkerton Agency." "Until 81. Beaumont was quiet for a moment. "Until 82, he corrected. "Worked the Pecos corridor mostly. Good reputation, from what I heard." "From what you heard." Beaumont's mouth twisted slightly. He picked up his fork, set it down again. He turned his head slowly and looked at Cord with the expression of a man reassessing a large number of things simultaneously. "The Harlans hired me on yesterday," he said. "I know. You know. Hatch tells me most things." A pause. "The things he knows, anyway." Beaumont sat back in his chair. He rubbed his jaw slowly with his knuckle. Outside, a horse moved past on the street. The morning light came through the thin curtains and put a pale stripe across the table. "What are you planning, Cord?" he said, finally. "Enforcing the law," Cord said. "With what, exactly?" "You've got a deputy who works for the other side, a town full of people who've been scared quiet for a year and a half, and 6 armed men who aren't going to politely submit to jurisdiction." 7 now, Cord said. "With you." Beaumont looked at him. A long look. Then he looked down at his plate. He ate 3 bites of eggs in silence. "You know," he said, "there are men in Wyoming, I'm talking about serious men, men who've been in this business a long time, who still tell stories about Elias Cord." He said it to his plate, not to Cord's face. "They tell them like history. Like something that happened before their time, even when they were there for it." Cord said nothing. "The business in Abilene," Beaumont said. "In 72. Silence. El Paso. Before that." The newspaper was folded carefully. Set aside. "The Cassidy trial." Beaumont looked up now. Met his eyes. Every man in that courtroom thought it was over. Every single man. 3 witnesses who'd been paid. A bawd judge. Armed men outside the door. Cord picked up his coffee. "You turned it inside out," Beaumont said. "Reversed every piece of it." Those 3 witnesses ended up testifying for the prosecution. "I never, in 30 years of this work, I never understood exactly how you did that." "Patience," Cord said. "And paperwork." Beaumont stared at him. Then he laughed, a short, disbelieving sound. "Patience and paperwork," he repeated. He shook his head slowly. "Does the county know who they actually sent?" "The county sent a sheriff," Cord said. "That's all that needs to be known." May Aldrich, who had been standing in the kitchen doorway listening for the past 3 minutes with a coffee pot in her hand and an expression of careful attention on her face, wrote nothing down, said nothing, and went back into her kitchen. She stood at the stove for a long moment. Then she poured herself a cup of coffee and drank it standing up. Part 5, The Weight of a Name. 2 things happened over the next 48 hours. The first was that Beaumont, quietly and without announcement, shifted his work. He remained technically employed by the Harlans, rode with one of their men to count cattle, ate at their table when invited, answered questions when asked. But the texture of what he paid attention to changed. He began noticing what Cord had noticed. He began asking, carefully and casually, the kinds of questions that built a picture. The second was that a second stranger arrived in town. This one came from the east, on a horse that was considerably better than the horse suggested he deserved, and he checked into May's boarding house under the name Calloway. Calloway was a compact man in his late 40s with wire spectacles and an ink stain on the inside of his right index finger that never quite went away. He carried a leather satchel similar to the one the city man from the south had carried, but larger, and he asked May, politely, for a table with good light. He spent most of his time writing. Cole Harlan's man watched him from across the street and reported back that the stranger from the east seemed to be some kind of clerk, which Clyde accepted because it was the simplest explanation and Clyde had a weakness for those. He was not a clerk. Cord met with Calloway for 2 hours on the evening of the 6th day, in the office with the lamp burning low and the door locked. What passed between them was not witnessed. What came out of it, slowly and with the patient, inexorable quality of water finding its level, was a legal structure so precise and comprehensive that when it was finally laid out, there would be nowhere for the Harlans to stand that wasn't occupied by a charge. On the 7th day, Clyde Harlan decided enough was enough. He'd been watching the old sheriff do his quiet rounds, his coffee drinking, his notebook writing, his conversations with frightened people who were talking to him for reasons Clyde couldn't quite pin down. He'd watched the former Pinkerton man whose usefulness seemed to be drifting. He'd watched the clerk from the east with his ink-stained hands. He'd watched Hatch grow increasingly nervous and increasingly unavailable. Something was building, and Clyde Harlan's survival instinct, which was sharper than his reasoning on most days, was telling him to step on it before it got taller. He put on his good hat. He walked across the street to the sheriff's office with Cole and 2 riders behind him, because that was how Clyde Harlan went places. He knocked. "Come in," Cord said. They came in. Cord was at his desk. The office was different from how it had looked when Clyde last seen it, which was years ago when he'd taken the key from Tom Ellery before having Tom Ellery killed. The desk was organized. The walls had paper on them, not wanted posters, but other things, maps and columns of writing. The notebook sat open. There was a second chair, occupied at the moment by Calloway, who looked up with the calm expression of a man who had been in worse rooms. "Sheriff," Clyde said, letting the word carry all his contempt. "We're going to have a talk about your employment situation." Cord looked at him. "All right. See, the way things work here. Mr. Harlan," Cord said, "I've been making a list." Clyde stopped. "Item 1, Cord said, as if reading, though he didn't look at the notebook. "Between March of last year and last month, your operation has collected what you call taxes from 11 businesses in Red Rock Flats. Total amount, $437. Those are figures confirmed by 7 independent witnesses, all of whom have now made written statements. Cole Harlan straightened slowly. Item 2. 63 head of cattle removed from the price and Dunmore operation without purchase or legal transfer. Documented by Hollis at the assay office, who was asked to appraise them and recorded the transaction. Hollis is a drunk, Cole said. Hollis is a meticulous man who keeps 2 sets of books, Cord said, which is something your accountant might have mentioned if you had one. Item 3. John Pelly, detained in your facility, which is this jailhouse, which you have been operating outside of legal authority, for 9 days in August without charges. Item 4. Stop talking, Clyde said. His voice had changed. The performance was gone from it. I'm nearly finished, Cord said. I said stop. Clyde stepped forward. His right hand moved to his hip. His 2 riders shifted. Cole's hand was on his belt. The room held very still. Cord sat at his desk with his hands flat on the surface, and he looked at Clyde Harlan the way a man looks at weather, not afraid of it, not contemptuous of it, simply taking a clear and honest accounting. There are 4 charges, Cord said, that carry federal weight. Mr. Calloway here is a federal magistrate's deputy. He arrived 2 days ago from Santa Fe. The paperwork is prepared. The witnesses have signed. This morning, at 6 o'clock, I sent a telegraph to the Territorial Marshal's office in Albuquerque. The office was opened again last week, which I expect you didn't know, requesting a marshal's escort. They'll arrive in 3 days. No one spoke. Now, Cord said, you can draw that weapon, Mr. Harlan. You are within your rights to try. But I want you to think very carefully about what that means in the context of what I've just described. Because right now, what you have are criminal charges. Very serious ones. But they're charges, and you have resources, and lawyers aren't entirely beyond your reach. If you draw that weapon in front of a federal magistrate's deputy, what you have instead is a completely different situation. Clyde Harlan's hand stayed at his hip. His eyes were doing something complicated. I've also sent a copy of all documentation to 3 separate newspaper offices, Cord continued. El Paso, Santa Fe, and Albuquerque. The story prints whether I'm alive next week or not. I arranged that specifically. A pause. Not a dramatic one. Just the space where the information needed to land. So. The clock on the wall ticked. Cole looked at his brother. Clyde wasn't looking back. I'll give you until tomorrow morning, Cord said, to make whatever arrangements you feel are appropriate. Part 6, The Name Surfaces. Clyde Harlan didn't sleep that night. He sat in the saloon after the others had gone to their rooms, nursing whiskey he wasn't tasting, replaying the conversation in the sheriff's office the way a man replays a fight he lost, looking for the moment he could have turned it. He kept arriving at the same problem. The old man hadn't been afraid. Not even a little. Men who weren't afraid were either crazy or they had something to stand on. Clyde had stopped believing in crazy a long time ago. He sent a rider to the telegraph office. Not to send a telegraph, to look at the record of what had been sent. The telegraph operator was a young man named Briggs who had been cooperative with the Harlans in small ways without ever quite crossing a line that would make him complicit in the large ones. He told the rider that yes, a telegraph had been sent. Early that morning. Addressed to the Territorial Marshal's office in Albuquerque. He hadn't kept a copy. He told the rider something else, hesitantly, with the look of a man who knows he's stepping into a current and isn't sure where it goes. He said, "You tell Clyde Harlan that the man who sent that telegraph, I've been thinking since he came into my office, I've been thinking about where I've seen his name before." The rider brought this back. Clyde looked at him. "Where?" Clyde said. "On a poster," Briggs said, when Clyde came to him directly. "Not a wanted poster. A different kind. I had it when I was young. I used to collect them, the newspapers and the bulletins. There was one about the El Paso incident, in '74. My uncle sent it from El Paso. About how the Deacon Gang, you know the Deacon Gang? Clyde said nothing. The name moved something in him. 7 men, Briggs said, who held El Paso for 18 days. In 74. Before I was born, almost. He stopped. Looked at Clyde's face. You know who stopped them. Clyde said, tell me. Briggs told him. Cole heard it from Clyde 20 minutes later, in the back room of the saloon, with the door closed. He listened with the careful, resistant attention of a man who doesn't want the thing being said to be true. Elias Cord, Cole said. Yes. The one they called. Yes. Clyde stopped him from saying the name out loud as if saying it might make it more real. Cole sat with it. That man is dead, he said finally. Or retired. Or, he'd have to be 70 years old. I don't know his age. He doesn't look like anything, Clyde said, and that was the part that hit Cole hardest, because it was true. The man didn't look like anything specific, which was, apparently, exactly the point. Cole thought about the saloon. The first night. The way the old man's eyes had moved around the room. The way Cole himself had felt, for just that single moment, like the one being measured. He said the marshals are coming in 3 days, Cole said. Yes. You believe him? Clyde was quiet for a long moment. He'd spent 1.5 years believing in his own invulnerability with the solid, unexamined faith of a man who has never encountered its limit. He was encountering it now, and the feeling was something he had no framework for. Yes, he said. Part 7, the moment the town understood. The next morning, Cord was on his porch with his coffee when Beaumont came across the street and stood at the foot of the steps. They know, Beaumont said. Cord drank his coffee. I was in the saloon at 6. The Harlan boys were already up, which they never are before 9. Their riders are packing. He paused. Someone found out who you are. Cord said nothing. Was that the plan? Part of it. Beaumont leaned on the porch rail. He'd taken off the jacket he'd worn as a Harlan rider. He was in his own clothes now. Briggs at the telegraph office, he's the one who put it together. He went to the Harlans last night. I don't know if he thought he was helping them or hurting them. Maybe both. A pause. Once Clyde knew. He'd pass it through town by morning, Cord said. He already has. Cord set his coffee cup down. He rose from the chair, one smooth movement, not the careful levering of an old man, just a man rising, and stood at the edge of the porch. He looked down the street. The street was different. It took a moment to understand why, and then it became clear. People were out. Not many, but more than usual, and in different places than usual. Garner from the feed store was standing in his doorway. Mrs. Pemberton from the dry goods was on her step. The assay officer Hollis was at his window. Briggs himself was visible outside the telegraph office, looking toward the saloon. They were all watching the saloon. And they were all, in their various ways, watching the sheriff's porch. Word had traveled, as it always traveled in a small dying town, with a speed and completeness that no official communication could match. And what it carried now was different from what it had carried a week ago. A week ago, it carried, they sent us some old man, won't last 2 weeks. Now it carried something else. Something that moved through the town like a change in pressure before a storm. May Aldrich came to stand in the boarding house doorway with her arms folded. She looked at Cord with an expression that combined exasperation and something much warmer and less definable. She had, Cord suspected, been up since before dawn. The saloon doors opened at 8:30. Cole Harlan came out first, then Clyde, then 2 of their riders. The other 3 appeared around the side of the building with horses. All of them were armed and packed, which was not a subtle message. Clyde walked across the street. He stopped at the foot of the porch steps. He and Cord regarded each other for a moment that felt longer than it was, the way all important moments do when they're actually happening. Clyde Harlan, in the daylight, with sleep missing from his face and something new moving behind his eyes, looked diminished. Not physically, he was the same size, the same set of shoulders. But there was a quality he'd carried since Cord arrived that was gone now. The quality of a man who has never encountered the edge of his own reach. "I want to know something," Clyde said. Cord waited. "All that, the notebook, the telegraph, the witnesses. All of that. Could you have done all that without?" He stopped. Started again. "Is the reputation doing the work here, or is the work doing the work?" It was, Cord thought, actually a good question. Maybe the best question Clyde Harlan had ever asked. "The work is doing the work," Cord said. "The reputation just keeps you from testing it." Clyde nodded slowly. He looked at the badge on Cord's chest. He looked at the street, at Garner in his doorway, at Mrs. Pemberton, at Hollis. At the town that was watching. At the town that had been frightened into silence for a year and a half and was now, without anyone making a speech or firing a shot, simply watching. "The marshal really coming?" Clyde said. "In 3 days," Cord said. "Likely with more paperwork than guns." "That's your preference," Cole said, from behind his brother. There was something in his voice that wasn't quite admiration and wasn't quite contempt. Something that sits between them, in men who respect ability even when they're on the wrong side of it. "I have nothing against guns," Cord said. "I've used them when needed. I prefer paperwork because paperwork lasts." A moment. The morning was warming. A hawk turned in the pale sky above the south hill. "We'll need to ride out," Clyde said. "I know. You're going to let us ride out." "You haven't been charged yet," Cord said. "Charged men don't get to ride out. Men who haven't yet been charged can make their own decisions." What he meant, what Clyde understood, with the instinct of a man who has operated outside the law long enough to understand its language, was this: leave now and the charges follow you to wherever you go, but follow you slowly, with process and paperwork, through official channels. Stay and face the marshals and face what has been built, here, in this town, in front of these people. He was being offered the slower form of justice, the kind that traveled through the legal system and might, conceivably, be navigated. He was not being offered escape. He was being offered the choice between one form of consequence and another. He was also being offered, Cord knew and Clyde knew and everyone watching from their doorways knew, the chance to leave this town in front of all these people who had watched him own it for a year and a half. There was a cost to that. A cost that would follow a man different than a legal charge, but with its own weight and permanence. Clyde looked at his brother. Cole looked back. Then Clyde Harlan nodded once, a short, tight movement, and he turned and walked back to his horse. They rode out at 9 in the morning. The town watched them go. No one cheered. No one shouted. It was not that kind of moment. It was the kind of moment that happens in the space between where something terrible was and where something better might be, a quiet, fragile space that everyone in Red Rock Flats was careful with, the way you are careful with something that has been broken and is only part way toward being whole. Garner stepped off his porch. He walked to the middle of the street and stood there, watching the Harlan dust settle at the south end of town. Mrs. Pemberton came down her steps. Hollis opened his door. Briggs from the telegraph office walked out slowly, hands in his pockets, the complicated expression of a man who had done something he wasn't sure was right and found out it was. Hatch appeared from the side of the building and stood beside Cord's porch. He was quiet for a moment. Then he took off his badge and held it out. "You should have this," he said. "For someone who deserves it." Cord looked at it. "Keep it," he said. "Wear it straight. That's all a badge requires." Hatch looked at the badge in his palm. Something moved in his face, not forgiveness, exactly, he hadn't earned that yet, but the recognition of a direction. He pinned it back on. Straight. Epilogue, what the town remembered. May Aldridge wrote it down. She wrote it in a letter to her sister in Colorado, because she needed to tell someone who wouldn't be in the middle of it, someone who could receive the story cleanly, and she wrote it in one long sitting at her kitchen table with 2 cups of tea. She wrote about the first day, the old man on the tired horse, everyone laughing. She wrote about the coffee and the notebook and the days of quiet, patient work. She wrote about Beaumont's face at the breakfast table, the recognition in it, the weight of a name belonging to a man sitting right there who hadn't used the name once in his own presence. She wrote about the morning the Harlans rode out, the town in its doorways, the hawk in the pale sky. She wrote, "The strange thing is that I don't think it was the reputation that undid them, though that's what everyone will say. I think it was the work. The witness statements. The records. The magistrate's deputy and the telegraph and the newspapers. He built it piece by piece while they were laughing at him, and by the time they knew who he was, the building was already done. The name was the last piece, not the first. That's not how the story will be told, of course. The story will be told the way stories always are, with the legend at the center and the careful work invisible around it. But I was there, and I know which part actually saved this town." She posted the letter and then stood on her porch for a while, watching the street. The street was different now. Still dusty. Still narrow by the standards of real cities. Still impermanent looking, the way western towns always look, like they're still deciding whether to stay. But the doors were open. The windows weren't boarded. A child was in the street for the first time in months, chasing a dog with the dedicated, joyful incompetence of children chasing dogs. Cord came out of the sheriff's office at noon. He sat in his chair. He poured coffee. She brought him a piece of pie she'd baked, because she baked when she was processing things and she'd been baking since 4 in the morning. He accepted it with a nod of genuine gratitude. "What happens now?" she asked. "The marshals come Thursday. They'll process the warrants, follow the Harlans west, which is where I expect they've gone. It'll take time." He ate a bite of pie. "Things take time. And you?" He looked at the street. At the child and the dog. At Garner wiping down his front window, at Hollis standing in his doorway talking to a man who'd stopped to shake his hand. At Hatch, who was walking the street with his badge on straight and his eyes forward, learning, one deliberate step at a time, what it meant to wear it correctly. "I'll be here for a while," Cord said. She looked at his hands on the coffee cup. The scar. The knuckles. The hands of a man who had carried considerable things for a considerable time and set them down only far enough to carry the next ones. "Do people always underestimate you?" she asked. He considered that. "Usually," he said. "It helps. Doesn't it bother you? People laughing. Not taking you seriously." He set the coffee cup down. He looked at the badge on his chest. At the star, plain and county issued, nothing remarkable about it. "Mrs. Aldridge," he said, "I've been in this work, the real work, the careful work, the kind that doesn't make good stories, for 31 years. In 31 years I've learned one thing above everything else." He looked at her. "A man who needs to be feared before he can be effective isn't effective. A man who needs to be known before he can do his job hasn't learned his job." He picked up the coffee again. "The star on my chest is what matters, not what anyone knows about the chest it's on." She thought about that for a long moment. "Still," she said, "I think it must be something. When they finally realize." He almost smiled. It was the closest she'd seen. Something in the set of his mouth, brief, private. "It has its moments," he said. The marshal's escort arrived on a Thursday, as expected. 2 men from the territorial office, professional, courteous, prepared. They reviewed Calloway's documentation with the focused appreciation of men who understood what they were looking at, a clean, airtight case built with patience and precision from scratch, in 7 days, in a town without resources. The senior marshal, a broad man named Wicker with 20 years of territorial service, read through the last pages and set them down on Cord's desk and looked at him. "Elias Cord," he said. Not a question. "Sheriff Cord," Cord said. Wicker smiled. "Sheriff Cord," he agreed. He didn't say anything else about it, which was the most professional courtesy he could offer, and Cord accepted it as such. The warrants went out. The Harlans were found 3 weeks later in a town west of Albuquerque, living carelessly, as men like that always do, as if the consequences they've outrun for years have given up rather than merely fallen behind. They hadn't given up. The trial was in Santa Fe and was reported in 5 newspapers. The evidence was precisely as Calloway and Cord had prepared it. The witnesses from Red Rock Flats came to testify. Garner and Hollis and Mrs. Pemberton and Price and Dunmore came on the county's funds and testified with the straightforward clarity of people who were finally, after a long time, able to say true things in a place built for true things. The verdict was not a surprise to anyone who had read the evidence. In Red Rock Flats, the streets stayed open. The church got its function back, which some people celebrated and some people had complicated feelings about because the saloon had, in spite of everything, been convenient. A compromise was reached regarding certain hours, which seemed to satisfy the theology and the practicality in roughly equal measure. The feed store expanded. The dry goods did modest but steady business. Hollis at the assay office became, gradually, the most meticulously documented operation in the territory, because habits formed in careful times have a way of persisting into better ones. Hatch wore his badge straight every day. It didn't make him a hero. It made him, slowly and with considerable effort and more than a few failures, something more durable than a hero. It made him reliable. And the sheriff sat in his chair on his porch most mornings with his coffee and his notebook, doing the quiet, careful, invisible work that towns require when they are trying to stay alive, and the people of Red Rock Flats went in and out of their doors and lived their lives around him, and slowly, the way trust always builds when it builds honestly, they stopped fearing what the next rider up the North Road might bring. They'd seen what a single quiet man with a notebook and a plan could accomplish. They'd seen it in 7 days. And they've learned, if they were paying attention, the lesson that takes the longest to learn and is the hardest to unlearn once learned. The most dangerous man in any room is not always the loudest one. He is sometimes the one in the corner, drinking his coffee, writing in his notebook, waiting patiently for the work to be finished. He was there when you arrived. He'll be there when you leave. And the only time you'll know exactly who he is will be the moment it's already too late to matter.